I would love to tell my story. Thanks for having me, Pat. This is great. Well, I wrote this story called The Housekeeper's Secret. It wasn't an easy story, but you never really know the people you love the most. And the story is really about love, secrets, resilience.
Sandra Schnakenburg has written a fabulous book called The Housekeeper's Secret. It's a memoir and so much more. It's part American history, part family history, and most of all, it's about the secrets that we all keep. What would happen if we let our secrets out? How might that change our perception of each other? How might it change us? Come listen to a mesmerizing story. Sandra, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
I would love to tell my story. Thanks for having me, Pat. This is great. Well, I wrote this story called The Housekeeper's Secret. It wasn't an easy story, but you never really know the people you love the most. And the story is really about love, secrets, resilience. It's about our housekeeper who came and planted the seed in our home 30 years. She came in 1965 and she was came as a humble, loving servant. She had a backstory that she had lost her husband and son in a car accident, and we were forbidden to ask her about that. So we went around just trying to, win her affection because we had lost several housekeepers before her. And my mom really needed help. She had just had her sixth child.
Oh,
And Lee came. She never had driven in her life, and she had no cooking skills. But she came with the love of children. And my mom said, "I need help with the family." And so we just danced around her and tried to win her over, but she did not commit to stay with us for 3 years. And we didn't really understand why. We begged her every 2 weeks she would go home. But on fast forward 30 years later on her deathbed, she had asked me to write her story. And this is a story that I didn't know because while she was living with us, she always had said, "I have a story and nobody will ever believe it." Well, we knew the story she told us. It was the story when she first came, the maid agency told us she had lost her husband and son in a car accident. My mom had deep compassion, and this is why we loved her so much because my mom thought, well, maybe our family will replace her losses, and we just had this, immediate bond. Well, as it turns out, and this is not part of the secret, but Lee basically had fabricated her entire past, including her husband and son, her identity, and her birth date. Everything she was not true. And when I went to write her story, I found that out years later, and my whole family went into shock when we didn't know who she was, but I wanted to know why she did that. And she was able to pull it off because we lived on a 44-acre estate and we were isolated. And Lee didn't want to be found, and she didn't want to be found out. And it just so happened that our situation met her needs perfectly. She was isolated on this property, and people were looking for her for all those years. So I went on a wild goose chase, investigative journey to find out why did she do this, and it was difficult. There was a lot of blocks. It was heart wrenching because I wanted to honor her and write her story, but again, I didn't know what happened to her, and I didn't know her story. I didn't know why she had fabricated her past, and then as the breadcrumbs started coming in, which are all in the book, is it started to become like, wow, this is not just a secret. This is a lifelong secret of multiple people and family. And so it was so overwhelming. The truth was so overwhelming. I realized, not only was I going to tell her truth in this story, which was just riveting, but because she spent 30 years in our family and she came when I was 3.5 years old, I was going to unveil the story with my truth too. Because she came to our family and she brought wisdom, she brought Like, she brought calm and peace to the chaos that we had in our house. And I wanted some of that. I wanted some of what she had, and I followed her around like a mini me for years. Just I even wanted to be a housekeeper. I just wanted to do everything she had done because she did it all with meticulous pride and appreciation for her final product, whether it be shining a chandelier or a brass faucet or a window. She taught me how to do all these things. Part of all these chores that I was brought to do were part of my healing from a traumatic brain injury. When I was 13, I was in an accident. And it shows in the book that she identified with me, and I didn't know why. But after I found out her truth, I understood why and how she knew so much about traumatic brain injury and so much about focusing me on task, keeping me, to actually like do a puzzle and be able to focus on pieces. I mean, I found that that was one of the hardest things and the most frustrating things I could do. But she said every day after school, I wanted to work with her. She wanted me to work with her for an hour, and she slowly helped me organize my thoughts again. After a brain injury, it's almost like brain fog. It's like you're scrambled eggs in your head. You really don't know how to speak clearly or how to think before you say things, or even it's just a huge brain fog, and it's short-term memory loss too. So she could ask me to do one thing and I'd forget it. But all up, it ended up that Lee was the saving grace, not only to myself for my healing, but to my mother. She ended up they were 2 soulmates. My mom by the way, from completely different worlds, but my mom being so grounded and down to earth because of the way she was raised, and Lee so humble and loving. They both had a heart of God and faith and family, and they both connected at that level, and they made our family work in a way that was successful. And my mom finally got away from my dad, which was difficult, but it was also, she was finally free from being verbally abused and under narcissistic control, which all of us were for many years. And of course, Lee came with all this wisdom. She saw that from the day one. And, there's only so much she could say, but she dropped breadcrumbs over the years that we finally, looked at Lee for all of our answers and advice.
Did you have a sense of betrayal, um, when you found out that everything you thought was true was not?
That's so interesting because I had thought about that. I There was a millisecond that I thought, how dare she not be honest with us when we were honest with her about everything? But that was a millisecond, because when you realize what happened, you realize I realized what she had to do to survive and move forward with her life was to reinvent herself. So I understand too, like even on her deathbed, like she couldn't tell me the truth. So I didn't get anything. When she asked me to write her story, I had nothing to work with except for the lies, the fabricated truth, I would say, that she had told me. So I knew there was something there because I lived with a sense of curiosity all my life. Since I was a little girl, I would pester her about stories about her husband, like the birth dates or the accident dates or, anything. I wanted to know her wedding date. Every time I asked her anything specific, I got in trouble and I got like grounded. It's like, because it was like a promise, she had asked my mom, make sure nobody ever asked me about my past. And
I don't give away the book, but talk a little bit about Lee's past or his or family's history because it is an amazing story.
yeah, well, I can't, without giving away the secret, I could talk about her family alone. We
Yeah.
discovered is a famous family. She was, they were Creole, which was half French and half African American, and her ancestor on the African American side, Coin, is a very famous lady. There's books written about her. There's a museum in Louisiana on her. My husband and I went out there, and the history is so profound. They were one of the first slave families that were freed, And Coin had come from uh, this family that had the ingredients to cure medical diseases. And when Coin's master wife had gotten very, very ill, she had he had like had medical practitioners come from all over the globe to try to cure her, and none of them could cure her. So as a last resort, Coin offered, "Would you like me to make my African, herbs that
Mhm.
is very healing?" And she did, and she gave it to the wife, and it cured her from this disease that no doctor around the globe could cure. And so, as a payment, the master gave her um, two slaves and a piece of land. And what she did is she worked the land, and she had the slaves help her during the day, and they were like her workers while she was still a concubine for the master. She had a full-time job with the master, and then she had this property that she worked at night, and she would spear bears, and then she would sell their parts at the trading post. This is in like 1760s. And she ended up buying more land, buying more slaves, and she ended up having more property than any, Creole family in the history of Louisiana. And it turned out that they were the wealthiest. And I think it was around the Louisiana Purchase when they came in, and the Louisiana purchased all the
Yeah,
French Quarter land that belonged to the Creoles, so they lost everything. At that point,
amazing.
the whole family shifted, but the ancestral lineage is just this powerful strength, and living off the land, these herbs, these just incredible resilience. And I think Lee, our housekeeper, who was the great granddaughter of Coin, had inherited so much of her strength. I just, felt it doing it. I mean, Coin had 17 children. It's hard to imagine, but 7 of them were from another slave when she was younger, and then 10 of them were from, um, the Pierre Metoyer, which was her partner for 10 years, and she wasn't allowed to marry him because Pierre's parents forbade it. They were a royal type of family in France.
Do you think Lee knew this history in her family?
I do. She lived in Louisiana for the first 7 years of her life. And I believe because the museum was there and there was so much history there, she absolutely knew she came from a famous family.
I I'm just so stunned actually at the way she reinvented herself.
Yeah.
And before we got on, we were talking about this
Mhm.
and how I mean, when you're 20, you have one perspective of things. When you're 50, you have a different perspective.
Yeah.
What do you think? Could you have faced this truth about Lee when she was still living with you?
That's such a great question. And many things could have gone south if she had talked about it. The reason why it could have gone south is my mom had so much compassion for her. And if she had known some of these secrets, my mom would have had her gone out to reunite with these people with her family. And and we know now that they've been looking for her for many, many years. And we've gotten to know them quite well. But I would say things could have changed. I mean, first of all, she didn't have another source of income besides living with us in our home. And we didn't want to trap her, but she told us she had no family and she had
Mhm.
nobody left. She always said they were all dead, all her family. And I didn't believe it. Even as a child, I didn't believe it. I said, how could you be the fifth? Because we always shared the fact that we were both fifth daughters in our family. And I said, how could you have, four older siblings and all of them be dead? I don't understand it. Because she was only 42 when she came. We didn't know her age, though. She never told us her age. We had found that out later, um, after she died, actually, way after. Um, so it is a puzzle. Like my mom had so much compassion for her. She would have probably, you know, wanted to take her to her family and do anything she can to reunite her because she was such a family person. But as far as us, if she had told us her true story when she came, she might not have gotten the job at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because when you put somebody to be responsible for, helping raise your children, you're taking a big risk for somebody who had been through what Lee had been through, which we don't wanna say on the we don't wanna give it the secret away, but she was a high risk she would have been a high risk hire, and she was anyway, but we were very fortunate that she was just she was actually the most sane person in our family. That's that is the honest truth. I mean, we had a crazy family. We were, my parents were very poor when they married, and they got rich very quickly, and with all that, they were handling many, many kids with all this wealth so quickly. They didn't have a lot of instruction or guides or advisors on how to manage, and so things got out of control pretty quickly. Um, and
And
Lee was our
your
savior.
father was certainly, contributed to the chaos.
Oh, my dad was the center of it. Yeah, he didn't know how to handle it either, and he was also never dealt with his own demons from
Yeah.
his family, so he brought that in, and his father was very violent and really not a good man, so he just kind of buried that, and it came up in tough times in his life. It always haunted him.
I find the idea of recreating yourself the way Lee did to be just fascinating. It's
Yeah.
it's as if she walked into the situation and she gets to show this kind, wise, deep wisdom lady
Mm,
that is shaping the lives of all these kids.
mhm,
And that was just one small facet of who she was, but it's the only facet that your family found or saw.
mhm, right. Yeah, and what's interesting, I always like to say this, because her on the outside, she was, you know, she didn't have anything, and she had scars from her past. We kind of let that go. We didn't know what that was all about, but she came with her cup full, she had a overfull cup of generosity and love, and she just wanted to give her full cup to another family. And it's almost like on the outside we were the ones that looked all perfect, but on the inside our cup was empty. So we looked at Lee and we thought, wow, she's got all these qualities that I want some of that. Like, and I was starving for attention. There were so many things that happened in our family. I just felt like I wasn't being heard. I wasn't being seen. And Lee heard me and saw me. And then she had the love to give me and also the the approval I was seeking from my dad that I never really received. Lee gave it. And it was at the time I was like, you don't realize how big that was for my whole identity and my confidence to have someone believe in me enough to keep, you know, spending time with me and also giving me positive reinforcement where my dad's treatment of me was always a negative reinforcement. It was never enough.
We learn through extremes to some degree, hot, cold, light, dark, that type of
Mhm.
duality. I have to wonder if Lee's kindness isn't a direct result of a really difficult life.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I think she had a good heart, but also she also knew what true love is before all of her tragedy. I really think her parents had very strong principles. So she had the plan. God was in her heart. Like she had told me once, I said, "Why don't you ever go to church with our family if you're Catholic?" And she said, I went to church enough times in my entire life, as I was growing up, because she went every single day. Her family made her go. And that she goes, that would count for the rest of my life. She goes, "But God is with me every day anyway, so it doesn't matter whether I go to church or not." And she had that's what really helped her survive. I think she had the seeds were planted early on. She had this middle life tragedies over and over again, and then she came out of it saying, "Who am I?" Well, who am I? Sometimes we go back to who we are as a child, who we were when we were younger, and that's I think what kept her going is that she knew God was protected her. One, that she survived what she did was a miracle in itself. And I know that feeling because I was not supposed to live in my car accident, and I felt like, "Why am I here? Why is that?" Why am I here? And I think she felt like that too. So we both shared a lot of these. It was at different times, but almost similar struggles in
Mhm.
different ways. And she saw that in me. She saw herself in me when she was with our family.
Well, it's so interesting. We were talking about this before we started the podcast too, that when you're in the middle of your own life experience, you have no perspective on it.
Mhm.
You can't. You're just struggling to make it through. But all of a sudden, when you look back, you can now create a framework for what you went through, and you can tell your story many different ways.
Mhm.
It strikes me that Lee had that framework for you. She
Mhm.
had it out of her own life experience, and
Mhm.
part of her gift was to guide you through really difficult times.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that was just a miracle that she was in our family and noticed that I needed that guidance. And it wasn't for that, the perseverance, the resilience that I had to have to get through the recovery process of my accident. I learned perseverance and resilience through the process of writing this story and investigating the story, because writing alone wasn't my first career. It's finance and corporate business. So coming to this story and at the fact that she had asked me to write her story and I wasn't a trained writer, I didn't have my MFA, I had to break through many walls of fear. And I needed that perseverance and that resilience that I had learned from surviving the car accident, and to keep going and to have the courage to lean in to fear and difficulty. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is, but keep going.
What were your greatest fears with writing the book?
One of the fears were how the world was gonna receive it. Um, I was, told many things when I was learning, like taking writing classes at Rice University. I was told that it was too difficult of a story for a first book. I had 2 protagonists, 2 timelines, 2 arcs. I had 2 families to deal with that could have been very, insulting to the story that I was telling truth. They could have been, they could have stopped me from publishing it. I had just a lot of blocks, and then I had my own personal blocks, which was failure. What if I failed? What if people think I'm a horrible writer? What if I am a horrible writer? Like I, I was, that the fears were there, but then I really had to turn that around, and I did a lot of deep dives. I ended up, doing retreats, meditation I took up, and I still do it. I do a lot of positive affirmations. Every time I had a negative thought that went in my mind, I turned it around and said, thank you for this, gift of this, perseverance, or the gift of resilience to keep going. And I really felt like I had to be my own cheerleader through it all, because nobody really understood how hard it was until I started connecting to writers, other writers that had, created quotes about writing and books, and read several writing books that talked about the challenges of just going to the page every day. And really, the truth is, you have to just write the first shitty draft and just write it all
Yeah.
out. It's usually the first draft is for you, it's for your therapy. You don't publish that. And then you look at the story and you see it from a different perspective once you kind of like resolve your issues with the story and yourself. And then you write the story that you would want to read if you were the reader of your own story. And that's the story I wrote. I wanted to keep people up at night. I wanted it to be a page turner. So I
It
wanted to
is.
write it like fiction.
No, it's a wonderful story. You mentioned writing as being your therapy. I think that's really true because you have to face a lot of internal hurdles before that book comes out. I know
Mhm.
for me, the my first book, the hardest thing that I had to do, this sounds crazy, but it was to ask for endorsements for the book. So I sent out, inquiries to a number of people, and it took me forever to even do this. I was just terrified.
Mhm.
And they came back and I wouldn't look at them. I put them in a file. It's like then finally one day, I opened the file and I started reading these and it was like I started crying. I mean, it just blew me
Oh,
away what people said.
yeah.
And that for me, it was real therapy in terms of
Yeah.
I tend to be very self-critical,
Yes.
um, and, always looking to achieve and that type of thing,
Mhm.
and it was a real watershed in
Mhm.
terms of getting that book out. A real significant life experience, actually, and I think that the whole writing process has that possibility, particularly when you're telling a personal story.
Yeah, and, I have been so overwhelmed with, like, the positive reviews and feedback, and I'm also been absolutely shocked because it's won 2 awards. It's won written initially, it wasn't even out a month, and I won the nonfiction book award, the Gold Award. It was a top award, and the lady wrote, "Once in every 10 years, a book like this comes out." And it is a story because it's hard to believe that this all happened, and this is not gonna happen again because of our computers and background checks and all that. And then the second award was the Best Memoir 2024 for Firebird Award, which I was
Mhm,
like, "Wow, this is exciting." But recently, I was nominated as a finalist for IBPA, which is the Independent Book Publishing Award, and
mhm,
it's one of the top awards you can get in publishing. And it's for the I'm a finalist for the Gold Award in memoir for that. And then, I also was nominated for the Eric Hoffer Award as a finalist for best memoir, and I'm really excited about both of them. That they're both good. I'm going to find out in May, and they're both like award ceremonies, so we have to attend. And that's just something like I can't even. I'm like, pinch me. Is this really happening? Do people really nominate my book? Because these are awards that like thousands of people apply for, and I'm so grateful that it's being received on that level and acknowledged because it is a unique story and it is once in a lifetime or maybe once in a decade thing that this could ever happen. But not even in today's world, but back Lee came to our house in 1965. So
different world.
this is a lifetime story over decades of building.
How do you feel about having your story out there?
It's funny because I've been, doing book events and book clubs, and I walk into a room and everyone immediately knows everything, like so much about me. So I feel like my book has drawn people to me that they know me and they get me and they connect with me at a level that they never would have known if I didn't write the story. But at the same time, it's also a gift to them because many people that read the story come with me and say, "Wow, I had a father like yours," or "I had gone through, an eating disorder," or "I've gone through difficult, divorce from my parents," or "My dad had another family too," or some kind of thing, that's just tough. And this is what's interesting about this memoir is that it covers so many issues. It's a memoir that has one, the timeline is very long, but the issues are it's not only societal issues, mental illness, issues and personal, but it's also how mental illness was treated back in the day. It's about, family structure. It's about, different levels of abuse. And it's about so many issues where like normal memoir would be like how I recovered from alcoholism or how I
Mhm.
survived my divorce. This is just like multiple issues. And I think people have enjoyed it to the point where they're like, "This should be a Netflix series," or we need to go into you know, into this deeper because there's the issues that I wrote about in this book and the societal issues, even the Creel family, the history of the Creels have never been on film. And it's such a big history. Like it could be like the Yellowstone series where they have like three different, pieces, time periods, like the current Yellowstone and then 1923 and 1883. It could be like that because you could fill a whole series up with just one of the time periods in terms of story.
I think a lot of the issues you touch upon are fairly global. I have a theory that all families are dysfunctional. It's just a matter of which dysfunctions happen to exist at that point in
Yeah,
time
that's
in
right.
that family. But your father really was narcissistic. I mean, this is I don't wanna I mean, people throw that word around, but I
Mhm.
mean, oh my goodness, the chaos
Mm,
that he brought into the house and the total disregard
yeah,
for other people
yeah.
is just crushing.
It is crushing. It went to the very end in many ways. Is he was a victim of a lot in the end, but he still like never showed the same appreciation, like, even just tipping at a restaurant. Like, I had a waiter come up to me and he goes, "Did I do anything wrong? Your dad gave me such a little tip." Well, all of my family would keep, like, 50s or 100s in our pocket, so whenever we went to dinner with dad, we would always give them to the waiter because we knew, and we said, "Don't worry, he's like that. He's old school," whatever. We just made an excuse for him, but he was just, you know, he with all that he had, he could have been so generous, even to his family, but he wasn't. He was scared he was gonna lose it, and he lived in fear, and because of where he came from, he never dealt with any of that, never embraced.
What was his family's background?
He had just one sister, 9 years younger, and his, mom was, I I always say we have a lot of jokes in the family about grandma. She was probably the most negative person I ever met.
Oh.
She never could say a nice thing about any of, us girls, and I don't know what it was, but, like, as a joke, one time I just stayed at her house, I said, "Grandma, I'm not leaving here until you give me a compliment." I tested her, and I was there, I think, until 1 in the morning. She goes, "You have nice hair." But she was a tough cookie. She was raised in the Depression. She plucked the chickens. Her husband, Paul Krillick, my dad's dad, inherited a tavern, and he was his best customer. So you can figure that
Yeah,
out. And then in order to make because he was his best customer, there was no money there. So they're basically my grandma, served these chicken meals at the bar, so people came to eat, so that brought all the customers. So they just had it hard financially, and dad was like the receiver of his alcoholism and violence, but I don't know if he was ever hit. My dad wasn't a physically violent person. He was just verbally abusive. But he was negative. He was very negative, and his mother was very negative. It was like always pulling out what you're not. Instead
mm,
of saying, "Oh, you look good today," and say, "Well, let me find something wrong with you."
yeah.
This was what they did, and my grandma did it every time she saw me. She'd say like, "What's wrong with this?" or "What's wrong with that?" Even when I had a scar from my accident, she goes, "What's wrong with your face again?" I'm like, "Grandma, a car hit me." I mean, like, you're lucky I'm alive. I mean, do we have to go there? Yeah.
And what was your mom's background?
My mom came from a really, close family. Okay, she was one of 10. She was the ninth, and they were immigrants from Croatia. They had 7 kids when they came over on a boat, and they landed in Iowa, where my mom was born in Council Bluff, and then he got a job in Chicago. But anyway, he worked on the railroad, and a railroad car not her dad railroad car fell over and killed him when my mom was
Mm,
1. Her mother was 30 years old and a widowed with 10 children, and she didn't speak a word of English. So they moved into this one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, and she raised all those kids, and she, had the older ones doing jobs and bringing home the money for her to buy bread, and that was how they lived, and it was just about a mile south of University of Chicago. She showed me the area that she grew up in, and it was just they didn't have any money, but they had so much faith in God, and they had so much community, and their family was such a unit of tight, you know, they just held together. My mom was super close to one of her sisters, Auntie Di. She was actually close to all of them, but many of them were way older than her. But my Auntie Di ended up living with us for many years, off and on, and, she had close brothers too that she, appealed to, but she struggled a lot, but my mom was definitely the one who, became, more of like she became like a superstar. Like I always she's like a cross between like Jackie O and like Mother Teresa. She was so faithful and giving to the poor, and then she was also so, classy. Like, she dressed like Jackie O. She had all hats and perfectly matching outfits, and she was a socialite with my dad. So we ended up being kind of raised like wallflowers, like, all look pretty, but, just don't open your mouth wherever we go, So we were never encouraged to be intelligent conversationalists. We were show up and shine as a family, but don't say anything. So all of the girls ended up getting educated and figuring out their way. But my brother was the youngest, and he was the boy who was supposed to take over the business, which didn't really work out. But yeah, it was troublesome. So because dad wasn't around when he was being raised, and he didn't really have any guidance.
And I think the information available to people of our parents' age is very different than the information available today. I'm not sure how much that changes people's behaviors as parents. I think they have different challenges to some degree today. But
Mhm.
now we have a lot more information, at least available to be better parents.
Oh, so much better. And well, if you think about it, after the war, everybody just wanted to make money and expand their families, right? And that was the mode they were in. It's
They
just
wanted to get back to normal, whatever normal was.
yes, whatever normal was, yes. But then now we have like this, these entitled children, or we have, children who don't want to work as much or whatever it is. I mean, we have privileged children that have so much money in their family that's handed down from that generation that my dad started at, that they end up wanting to be the CEO before they're, the bottom of the company. They have to build themselves up. So it's interesting. The expectations are really different, but all goes into the parenting. I mean, and I think our family, like all my siblings are hard workers, and we all had to figure out how to get away from dad, was to get educated and work our own career, because we were so controlled by him, and he was angry when we moved out and didn't need him anymore. He was
Mm.
angry. He wanted to control us, always, and it was never a positive thing. It was always like what you're not doing well, or who you're not, and therefore it was like, why am I sticking around with that?
I think one of the big themes in your book is resilience. What are two or three others that you would say really their way through the book?
Two or three other resilient moments.
No, two or three other themes in your book,
Oh,
because it's full of so many wonderful themes and
mhm.
storylines. Resilience is right up there at the top. But what are some of the other ones that you would want people to know about?
Oh, well, first, secrets. I mean, that's when you have secrets and you're keeping them and harboring them, they build up inside, and people, they put walls between people. Even if you don't think they know them, if you're harboring a secret that to somebody you love, you can't love them fully if they don't know what's going on inside of you. So I think a lot of that. I mean, Lee, I felt loved by Lee, but she had a secret, and I believe that there is a part of me that thought she might have lost some of her, long-term memory of what had happened to her. But then I know from studies of brain injury that in time your memory comes back. So, um, one of the things was that if she did recall a lot of the things that had occurred in her life that were dark, she buried that, but she still had made a she didn't want to tell her secret because she didn't want my mom to know she lied to get the job.
Yeah.
But going back to that, it's family too, like support and survival. We all wanna survive, whatever we're going through, and I think each one of our family members, from my oldest sister to my youngest brother to Lee to mom and dad, we all had a survival instinct in us. Well, from my mom's, growing up, she did, and from my dad's also growing up, he brought that into our home, but all of us kids were surviving their tactics that they
Yeah.
hadn't healed, and we were now survivors of them, which I think that's what generational it kinda that's what happens in family. You spill whatever you don't heal keeps going, it goes to the next generation.
It
It
does unless you consciously change that pattern. Um,
yes.
and, it's interesting you say that because I look at Lee, the healing and some of the other aspects of her family certainly flowed through to her. Some very good things flowed through to her.
Yeah, absolutely. She had so much good in her that there was not even an ounce of bad in her. I think she lived within boundaries of what she wanted us to know, and whenever we stepped out of the boundaries, I saw her anger. It was the only
Mhm.
time I ever saw her angry, really. I saw her depressed when the Cubs would lose a game or, I mean, she would be like, really down, and she let the sports really dictate her highs and lows. It's really cute how she gravitated to the present moment. And I think that's something to be said in terms of another characteristic in the book is living in the present moment is what was a survival tactic. So you can't really do anything about your past. It's done, and the future is tomorrow. You can't, you can't really live it in the moment. But she lived in the absolute moment, like for every word said in the house, every joke said, every game that was played, everything that happened, it was that moment she took in and she processed it with her fullness of her heart. And that taught me a lot because I was living in sort of like fear of my future, fear of dad walking in the room, just all these different things were going on in a child's mind. And I watched her and I thought, I want some of that. How did she get to be so joyful? Like, how does she jump out of her chair when there's a hit, like a baseball, grand slam happening, but she gets so excited about it that I was like, I want to feel that excitement about that too. Like, how does that happen? And so I think she's really built a world around boundaries so she could live in that happiness without dipping outside of the boundary into her past or future.
That's a really interesting concept, the idea that you can stay in that happy place, and I think it's very doable. Being very present moment, I think, is part of it,
Mhm.
because in the present moment lies infinite possibility, creativity. Whatever you want to have is available to be created this moment now.
I
The
love it.
past is done. Can't move in the future. If we live in our minds, we're not living our lives,
Right.
and we're missing the actual experience, because
Yes.
life ultimately and wisdom ultimately, I think, is experiential. You
Totally.
can't learn it in a book.
Right. That's so good because it's so rich in listeners to hear that because we have so much going on in our world today. But if we take each moment, and there's a lot of books, people writing about happiness, how to find happiness, what is happiness? There's a lot of happiness out there. People seeking happiness. It's like happiness is right now, in today, in the moment, and whatever is going on in their life. Which I do have a lot of things going on in my life that could bring me down, but I don't allow it because it's I'm not inviting that in my psyche. I'm dealing with it, but I'm knowing this is just a part of the journey. And
And I think, you can have bad and good things going on simultaneously.
Mhm,
Um,
exactly.
you know, I went through 6 years of cancer treatment, for example,
Wow.
and, obviously, there were a lot of bad things going on,
Mhm.
but one of the things I discovered in doing that was meditation,
Yeah,
and the power of being present, really fully present, and enjoying what is in front of you, and how this moment now is okay, no
yeah,
matter what else is going on. And I think that that's a profound shift,
yeah,
particularly, I mean, if you look at our society, we're so bound by our electronics and da
yeah,
da 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 da, all the data that comes in and the opinions and everything else, and
mhm,
we forget to just be.
yeah. So true. We forget to just be, and we don't. And also with meditation, it's such a secret to happiness because
Yes.
you are always asking or wishing or hoping, but here in meditation, you're receiving. You're receiving what the infinite universe has for you as a gift, but you can't receive it unless you're quiet. You're
Well,
listening, you know?
and you can't live a conscious life until you witness your thoughts.
Right.
So when you one of the things that meditate you that one of the many things that comes out of meditation is the ability to witness your thoughts. Now
Mhm.
you can make a conscious choice. You weren't making conscious choices before. You were just
Exactly.
reacting.
Exactly. Yeah, and so, that's a key right there, what you just said, because many, many people live their life just reacting to the surroundings around them, and there's a lot to react to.
Yeah.
There's all these other, news stations and podcasts and, blah, 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 but what really it is, it's about, like, taking it in and having, and not reacting, but processing in a positive way, like, how could I learn from this? What can I do about this? How could I change the world for the better? How can I give back to people that are doing good things? This is it's all about the processing of making the world a better place.
And your words matter.
Mhm.
And taking a moment, I think, to consider the words that you're putting out is really is a moment well spent.
Yeah.
I tend to see the world in terms of a lot of energy flows, if you will. Secrets are energetic, for example,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, aren't they? Yeah. Um, and I think that if you can pause for that moment and put out something with good energy, that
Mm.
energy radiates.
Right.
And negative energy does too, for that matter,
Yes.
but that's not where you wanna be.
Exactly. So I always do that, like, stop and because everything is energy in my
Yeah,
interpretation, but start with, like, just "Thank you." Like, that's the best prayer you could ever, say, is just "Thank you," and then start with that, and then just think about all the things you're grateful for beyond that, and it switches the poor me story or the Debbie Downer, narrative. It actually turns it the other way is what did I learn from that and what can I do about that now and how can I make it better? And it just the whole I know there's a lot of listeners that have like issues in their life. We all have issues, but when you really take those issues and take them get the best learnings from them and then go forward, then it's like you've actually grown, you've actually seen the world in a better light and you bring in more energy that brings better things that to you in life because the energy is attraction and it's like the laws of attraction like you put what you put out is going to come back to you if you're
and I think
always
too yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think too, you can tell your story in a lot of different ways. I mean, everybody has issues, as you were saying, and that's very true.
Mhm.
But if you look at your story, can you tell it 3 ways? Can you tell it from 3 different emotional perspectives? Say, from a perspective of gratitude, from a perspective of hate, from
Mhm.
a sp
Yeah, yeah,
whatever. But I think that when you go through that exercise of telling your story 3 ways, you start to realize it is just a story, and you
yeah,
can choose how you want to interpret it. And I think
absolutely.
that your point of interpreting it in a positive, "What can I learn?" way is
Mhm.
really the key to living a decent life.
Mhm. It is, it really is because it's not what happens to us that makes us different from other people, it's how we what we do with what happens to us.